And we are on. What's good, guys? It is Zerilath Eternal. And we are on chapter 14 for the Jewish War. Flavius Josephus. How's it going, Howard Ramberg? Welcome to the show. Thanks for being in the chat. Excellent. So today's going to be a quickie. This is a 10-page chapter. So I'm just prepared for one break because we're just going to do the good old 5 and 5 split. And so hopefully we'll be out of here in less than 90 minutes. Tonight, that song was Bramir, The Rift Between Us. I think it's I guess it's like a long distance love song or something to that effect. And even though the theme's not appropriate, I'm not always aiming for the appropriate theme to the subject matter. Just something that's got the vibe check, right? It's just like, am I vibing? Is this vibing tonight? This is vibing for me tonight. And that has a lot more to do with it, right? Because if the Vespasian song sucked, if it wasn't the vibe, I wouldn't have played it, right? So anyway. So here we are. So Vespasia is now marching into Jerusalem, or marching to Jerusalem, and so Josephus is going to give this breakdown. I'm very interested about this because this might echo the politics of the day in Israel with the various different political parties. As you know, they have a very polypolitical parliament over there. They're not just two parties fighting over stuff. It's part of the reason why the Likud party prevails as it does, because all it needs is a plurality, not a majority of the vote under that system, which is a little bit problematic, right? Because of course, like, your prime minister is going to be of the party that has the majority in parliament. Parliamentary systems are kind of weird because the executive is kind of like the Speaker of the House, if the Speaker of the House were the executive, right? And then I don't know. So, like, some places have, like, parliaments, but they also have, like, presidents, I think, and then those presidents backseat it, or I don't remember exactly all the little bitty details of the parliamentary system in that way. I just know that the buck stops with the prime minister, right? So anyway. Chapter 14. Factions in Jerusalem. Only Gishala, a little town in Galilee, was left unreduced. The inhabitants were anxious for peace. For the most part, they were farmers whose only concern was the prospect of a good harvest. But a powerful gang of bandits had infiltrated into their midst, and some of the townsmen had been infected. These, like, it's very interesting how, like, 100 years ago, right, because this is not the first time this vernacular in choice of translate, like, did they use disease-based translate, like, is that the kind of wording in Josephus's own words that he used, right? Because you know, like I said, there's already been a handful of, like, 20th century vernaculars in here, not just weight and measure systems being used, right? Because this is correct in the parlance of our day, in which official terms in psychology and official terms in medicine cross over, right? So infected by the bandits' ideology, right? You know, this would be like, you know, Antifa moves into town and then your kid decides to join up because they made a persuasive argument, and then start doing dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Not a song tonight, but it's always fun. Like, I like using the term dirty deeds, and then my little AC/DC fan in me is like, say dirt cheap, say dirt cheap. And dirt cheap. It has to happen, right? You're a rocker, you're a metalhead, you say dirty deeds done dirt cheap, where you fucking go home because you failed as a man. These were incited and organized for revolt by John, son of Levi, an imposter expert in every wile, full of ambitions and with a knack of making them succeed. Anyone could see that he was bent on war as a means of becoming dictator. Okay, so this is the theory, right? It's just like, yeah, he's gonna be a dictator. It's just like, you're okay, and the Caesar of Rome is not a dictator. He's not. You worship him as a god. He was the recognized leader of the insurgent element in Gischala. Thanks to them, the population who would gladly have spent envoys offering to surrender were now preparing a warlike reception for the Romans. To crush this opposition, Vespasian dispatched Titus with 1,000 horse, removing the 10th Legion to Scythopolis. Right, so I'll put it to you this way, right? An emperor who may have dictates that are better than the likely or the major problem that you're having. Like, if you go in and you attack a town divided, you can use you can just deal with all of that yourself, and now you've suppressed both aspects of that town, that region's autonomy, by coming in and not letting them dispute it themselves. Moving the 10th Legion from Scythopolis. Okay, so he himself returned to Caesarea with the other two to rest them after their continuous efforts, and in the belief that good living in the city would make them fit and keen in readiness for the coming struggles. It was no light task that he saw awaiting him at Jerusalem, for she was the city of kings and capital of the whole race, and into her was flowing a stream of refugees from the war. Her natural strength and formidable walls caused him no small anxiety, and he realized that the daring spirits within would, even without walls, be hard to subdue. So he trained his soldiers like athletes before a contest. When Titus rode up to Gischala, he saw it would be easy to take the town by assault, but he knew that if it was stormed, there would be a wholesale massacre of the population by the soldiery, and he was already sick of bloodshed and grieved that the whole people, without distinction, must share the fate of the guilty. He feared that, really? I don't know. Things have been pretty brutal. Lots of women and children have been slaughtered under this Roman and prior Romans things and other kings and their things. It's just like, you really are? Stephanie! Hey, Steph. Creators on the crest. Hey, listen, everybody. If you want another incredibly talented tarot reader, also with the runes and some other oracles, Stephanie over here has a really great channel. She puts out stuff every week, couple times a week sometimes. She'll run through, she'll do your astrology as a reading and all other sorts of things. She's a friend of mine. I've been on her channel. I've actually paid for a reading from her once. It was really, really helpful when I was going through some social upheaval that was very upsetting to me at the time. She's great. She's tremendous. Even a divinator like me needs a divinator like her. All right. He was therefore anxious to persuade the town to surrender on terms. The wall was crowded with men, mostly members of the corrupt gang. So he asked them what gave them such confidence that when every other town had fallen, they alone opposed the Roman arms. They had seen much stronger towns overthrown by a single assault, while all who had accepted Roman terms enjoyed their own possessions in safety. The same terms he now offered them, freely forgiving their truculence. To desire freedom was natural enough. To persist when no possibility remained was inexcusable. If they were refused to accept his generous proposals and sincere offers, they would experience the remorselessness of his arms and learn the terrible lesson that to the Roman engines their wall was just a toy. The wall that gave them such confidence that they were the only Galileans to show themselves truculent prisoners. You're welcome, Steph, of course. To these overtures, none of the townspeople could make any reply. They could not even go on to the wall. The bandits had already occupied it all, and there were sentries at the gates to see that no one slipped out to accept the offered truce of admitted any of the cavalry into town. But John replied that he welcomed the proposals himself and would either persuade or constrain any dissidents. However, in accordance with the Jewish law, Titus must allow them that day, the 7th, on which it was on an offense either to take up arms or to make peace, right? And so, that's the basic kind of like Roman thing, like, because, you see, theoretically, Rome is not trying to convert you to anything, but Rome is trying to force you to say, you're going to put, Caesar's, monument here, like where your sacred shit is, and you got to give offerings to it. And, like, they're doing that kind of thing, right? They're saying, like, you must put Caesar in, you must make him the chief thing, right? Then otherwise, you're still your pagan whatever, so like they're not trying to take Yahweh away from the Jews, but they are trying yet still to force them to break the first commandment. So anyway, it was known even to the Romans that they did no work of any kind when the 7th day came around. If they were compelled to break that rule, the man who compelled them would be as guilty as themselves. The delay would do Titus no harm. What could be attempted in one night except fight, which would be impossible if he camped round the town? It would be a great pain to them not to infringe any ancestral custom, and gracious in one who granted an unlooked-for peace to respect the laws of those whose lives he spared. And part of the reason why they're doing this at the time is that they hadn't figured out how to do the conversion thing. It really wasn't of interest. They just really were just operating under the, okay, what is their most offensive, they will rally against us in violence and such thing that we can do, right? Like, let's, like, not do that and then, like, work around it towards our goals, right? And that's what effective leaders do. Not good leaders, but effective leaders. The effective leader might be good, depending on the context, right? I mean, we can look at this current president, who every day you can go get information on massive ICE raids sweeping across the country. Massive. All over the place. Restaurants, businesses, apartments, hotels, all manner of everywhere, getting massive groups of people as such. And it took a long time for somebody with this kind of attitude to get enough of our population to share that attitude. And you eventually have to pull the trigger dealing with somebody who's going to be angry with you about it. Right? And an empire is always like that, right? I've been watching Andor, and I've been talking about how Andor, because Andor, it's really giving you the nuts and bolts of the empire in Andor, right? And it's just like, what does a empire look like that is atheist? And what is its principle if it doesn't have a god of conquest? It has a principle of conquest. It has order, right? it fears freedom. It has every excuse to destroy any matter of freedom, put everything under containment and control, right? Because that's what their God demands, and that's the God of the empire as channeled through the emperor. That's the idea, right? We've become more like that empire as we have continued to have our experiments with secular rule. The British Empire may have had a whole lot of spirituality behind it, which was mostly for the morale of the troops, but largely the king was doing his own thing as a quote emperor, right? And then America, founded by deists who they didn't want it to be an atheist thing, they did want it to be a secular thing, as the deists that they were, right? Which was one of the best attitudes to come in on, right? And it's been helpful in creating all sorts of freedoms here, right? These are good, those were good ideas. Anyway, it's hard to articulate these things, and I'd much rather live with no masters and no slaves. But anyway, with such pleas, John beguiled Titus, being less anxious about the seventh day than about his own skin. He... hold on a second. Darn it. Than his own skin, sorry. He was afraid of being left to his fate the moment the town fell, and pinned his hopes of life on darkness and flight. But clearly, God was preserving John to bring destruction. Excuse me. On Jerusalem. And it was his doing that Titus not only accepted this pretext for delay, but even pitched his camp further from the town at Sidosa or Sidoessa. So this is a strong inland village of the Tyrians, always engaged in bitter strife with the Galileans. Okay, so the people of Tyre and the people of Galilee were bitter enemies. So, the size of the population and the strength of the defenses enabled it to maintain the struggle against the surrounding nation. In the night, John, seeing no Roman guards round the town, seized his chance, and taking with him not only his armed bodyguard, but a large number of non-combatants with their families, fled towards Jerusalem. For 2 miles or more, he managed to carry along a mob of women and children, though spurred on by fear of prison and death. But as he pressed on further, they dropped behind, and agonizing were the lamentations of those thus abandoned. The further each found himself from his own kith and kin, the nearer he imagined himself to the enemy, believing that their captors were hard on their heels. They lost their heads and turned when they heard the footsteps of their fleeing companions, as if their pursuers were upon them. Many lost their way, and even on the high road, many were crushed in the fight to get to the front. Miserable was the plight of women and children. Some even ventured to call their husbands or kinsmen back, shrieking and imploring them to wait. But John's commands were obeyed. Every man for himself, he shouted, "Make for the place where you can avenge those left behind if they fall into Roman hands." So, as every man made what speed his strength allowed, the column of fugitives lengthened out. When dawn came, Titus advanced to the wall to conclude the treaty. The people opened the gates to him, and coming forward with their families, hailed him as a benefactor who had delivered the town from oppression. They told him of John's flight, and begged him to spare them and to come and punish the remaining rebels. Titus, deciding that the people's requests must take second place, sent a detachment of horse to pursue John, but they failed to overtake him, and he reached Jerusalem in safety. Right, so then you've got all sorts of people that had pro-Roman attitudes, right? So there were definitely, there were all manner of Roman attitudes. I believe as we started this book, Herod was pro-Roman, and one of the reasons why there was so much bitter hatred for him from his rivals that he had to vanquish. Yes. Effective leaders being the key word as you distinguish threads of manipulation sown throughout the populace. Of those who had set out with him, however, some 6,000 were killed and nearly 3,000 women and children were rounded up and brought back. Titus was vexed at his failure to inflict immediate punishment on John for his deception, but for his baffled rage, he had compensation enough in the mass of prisoners and heaps of dead. So he entered the town amid acclamations, and ordering his men to tear down a short section of the wall in token of capture, used threats rather than punishment to subdue the disturbers of the peace. For many, from personal animosity and private enmity, would denounce the innocent. If he tried to pick out those who deserved punishment, it was better to leave the guilty in suspense and fear than to destroy any guiltless person with them. For the guilty man would perhaps change his ways from fear of punishment, appreciating the pardon he had received for the past, but for those needlessly put to death, there could be no redress. Right? So I do appreciate that there's this level of forethought going over here, right? Granted, towards what end exactly? Like, what is it about Jerusalem where this is as such, right? We're getting, this book, this chapter is meant to paint that picture, obviously, right? So, however, he made the town safe with a garrison by which he could restrain the disaffected and leave the peaceably inclined more secure. Thus, the whole of Galilee was subdued, after giving the Romans plenty of strenuous exercise in preparation for the assault on Jerusalem. On John's arrival, there the whole population turned out and round each of his companions in flight. A vast crowd collected, crying for news of events outside. Give me 1 second. Just want to double check where I am with my page count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. Still hot and breathless, the fugitives could not hide the stress they were under, but they swaggered in their sorry plight, declaring they had not run from the Romans, but had come to give them battle on favorable ground. Obviously, it would be senseless and futile to risk their lives in a hopeless struggle for Gischala and other weak little towns, when they ought to save their arms and energies for the united defense of the capital. Then they mentioned in passing the capture of Gischala, but what they euphemistically describe as their withdrawal was generally seen to have been a rout. When, however, the fate of the poisoners became known, utter dismay seized the people, who saw in it an unmistakable omen of their own. John himself, quite unconcerned for those he had left behind, went round, urging them one and all to war by false hopes, making out that Roman power was feasible, exaggerating Jewish strength, and ridiculing the ignorance of the inexperienced. Not even if they grew wings could the Romans ever get over the wall of Jerusalem, after being so severely mauled in their attacks on Galilean villages and wearing out their engines against flimsy walls. With this nonsense, he drew most of the young men into his net and whetted their appetite for war. But of the sensible older men, there was not one but saw what was coming and mourned for the city as if it had perished already. Such was the confused state of the people, but the country population had been torn by dissension before faction reared its head in Jerusalem. For Titus had left Gischala for Caesarea, and Vespasian had marched from Caesarea to Jamnia and Azotus. These towns he reduced and garrisoned, returning with a mass of people who had surrendered on terms. Every town was seething with turmoil and civil war, and as soon as the Romans gave them a breathing space, they turned their hands against each other. Between advocates of war and lovers of peace, there was a fierce quarrel. First of all, in the home, family unity was disrupted by partisan bitterness. Then the nearest kinsmen severed all ties of blood, and attaching themselves to men who thought as they did, lined up on opposite sides. Faction reigned everywhere. The revolutionaries and Jingoes, with the boldness of youth, silencing the old and sensible. The revolutionaries and Jingoes? What the fuck is a Jingo? I've never heard that term. Give me a minute here. I'm going to look up a Jingo. A Jingo. What's a Jingo? One who vociferously supports one's country, especially one who supports a belligerent foreign policy. A chauvinistic patriot. Oh. Hi. I'm Steve Jingo. Anyway, it's also used as a jocular oath, and a statesman who pursues or who favors aggressive, domineering policy in foreign affairs. Oh, no. Okay, if that's actually... Oh, belligerent foreign... Oh, never mind. I'm not a Jingo, then. You would get, like, Jingos would be effectively... well, that would be like the neocons, right? Like, you could possibly call this Republican Party chauvinistic, but they are certainly don't have this belligerent foreign policy. I mean, the manner in which he is handling Russia-Ukraine is a perfect example of this. Whoops, sorry. All right. They began by one all plundering their neighbors. Then, forming themselves into companies, they extended their brigandage all over the country, so that in lawless brutality the Romans were no worse than the victim's own countrymen. In fact, those who were stripped bare thought it far preferable to be captured by the Romans. The garrison of the town, partly to avoid trouble and partly to spite the Jews, did little or nothing to protect those attacked. When at last the leaders of the various gangs of bandits had had enough of the plundering the countryside, they came together and formed a single pack of rogues. Then they infiltrated into Jerusalem, a city without military command, where by age-old custom any of Jewish race were admitted without scrutiny, and where at this juncture everyone thought that those who were pouring in all came out of kindness as allies. Ah, yes, there's a naivete for you, right? That's like saying, like, well, I'm German and you're German and all Germans like each other and don't have anything violent involved in their issues, and you understand me, I think I understand you, and yeah, come on in. Yeah, come on in, right? So, you know, this is also, Israel's still like this, right? They fast track your citizenship if you are a non-Israeli Jew. You can go get that set up as long as you prove your Jewishness. They think that this kind of racial puritanism is unique to whites. Unique to whites. I'd like you to ask South Africa. I'd like you to ask South Africa about that. It was this very thing that, apart from the faction fighting, ultimately wrecked the city. For a useless and idle mob consumed supplies adequate for the fighting men, and in addition to war, they brought on themselves faction and starvation. Other bandits from the country slipped into the city, and joining forces with the desperadoes within, gave themselves to every imaginable crime. They did not limit their insolence to theft and brigandage, but went so far as to commit murder, not by night or secretly or against the common people, but openly by day, beginning with the most eminent. First, they seized and imprisoned Antipas, a member of the royal family and one of the most influential men in the city, entrusted with all the public funds. Next came Levius, an eminent man, and Sophus, son of Raguel. Raguel? Both of royal blood. Then all who were prominent in the country. Terror filled the people, and as if the city had been taken by storm, no one thought of anything but his own safety. So just your own safety? Not the safety of other Jews because of your city's policy of you're a Jew! Come on in. Big hugs. No big hugs? No big hugs for your fellow Jew here? Shocking. I'm shocked. But anyway, the terrorists were not satisfied with imprisoning their captives. They thought it unsafe to keep men of influence in such custody for long, as their households were quite large enough to attempt their rescue, and the whole people might be incensed by their outrageous conduct to rise in revolt. So they decided to murder the prisoners, choosing for their tool the most bloodthirsty assassin among them, one John, whose father was called in the vernacular Dorcas. He, with 10 others, went into the prison, sword in hand, and ran the prisoners through. This outrageous crime they justified with a monstrous lie. They alleged that the men had approached the Romans about surrendering Jerusalem and had perished as traitors to their country. In fact, they boasted of their crimes as if they were benefactors and saviors of the city. The result was that the people became so cowed and abject, terrorists so rabid, that they actually got control of the appointment of chief priests, setting aside the families, which in turn provided these. They appointed obscure persons of no family to gain partners in crime. So, they're taking over the religious organizations, right? Now, the question is, what's going on with the current religious organizations? Is it as simple as what Josephus wants to tell us about Jerusalem, and that everything was hunky-dory, just they were naive? That's it? Everything was cool, and they were just naive. There was no underlying weaknesses in the priest class, right? It's interesting, right? There's not all those details covered in this book, at least not that I know of yet. Those who, without deserving it, found themselves in the highest office were inevitably the creatures of those who had put them there. You don't say. Again, so that's just kind of like, yeah, you take over a political party, you make up the body of that party. That's pretty simple, and thus the only candidates you're going to produce for office are going to be from your people who took over the party. And somehow you still have the audacity to call yourself something that you're not because you stole it. Because you forced your way in and then you changed everything and made it not even that anymore, but it's just that by name, right? This happens. This is what happens, right? Like, the Democrat and Republican parties are institutional engines of appointing elected officials. And you seem to be incapable of overthrowing those parties, so you have to take over those parties. And that's what Trump did, and that is what the left has been doing, because Barack Obama was kind of like this last gatekeeper, this appeal to the woke left that they were creating. And they still have some important officers that haven't been ratted out by their kind yet. And it's unclear whether things would get better or worse with these new people, because I certainly have no love for the people that are getting replaced, right? We certainly got a certain kind of downgrade when New York lost their guy and they got AOC in there, right? So anyway, again they sowed dissension between their rulers by various tricks and scandalous stories, turning the squabbles of those who might have restrained them to their own advantage, till, sated with their crimes against men, they transferred their insolence to the deity and entered the sanctuary with their feet polluted. Oh, uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. Somebody's messing around in the Holy of Holies. That ain't good. So the populace were now seething with discontent. Urged on by the oldest of the chief priests, Ananus, a man of the soundest judgment who might have saved the city if he had escaped the hands of the plotters, these made the temple of God their stronghold and refuge from popular upheavals, and the sanctuary became the center for their illegal operations. Through their atrocities ran a vein of ironic pretense more exasperating than the actions themselves. For to test the submissiveness of the people and prove their own strength, they attempted to appoint the chief priests by lot, though, as we said before, the succession was by birth. The excuse given for this arrangement was ancient custom. They said that from time immemorial the chief priesthood had been conferred by lot. In reality, this was a reversal of the regular practice and device of consolidating their power by arbitrary appointments. Assembling one of the chief priestly clans called Eniashin, they drew lots for a chief priest. The luck of the draw furnished the clearest proof of the depths to which they had sunk. The office fell to one Phanius, son of Samuel, of the village of Ophtha, a man not only not descended from chief priests, but too boorish to have any clear notion of what the chief priesthood might be. Right? So also, there's a subtext here, because we know the Bach saga, of they're trying to displace the lineage of the Hyperborean rabbis. Right? They're trying to just insert kind of like a people's revolution priest class, which is, not, well, I mean, now People's Revolution is not really what this is, but, it's just it's like a military junta kind of situation. I'm just saying that Josephus is qualifying them as, quote, dictator is just interesting. Like this is just like a gang. Right? This is like the Lord of Misrule kind of thing. It's just like these people are crazy, right? The Romans will be coming. Anyway, they dragged him willy-nilly from his holding and disguised him from head to foot like an actor on the stage. Oh, this sounds familiar. Robing him in the sacred vestments and teaching him his cues. So this guy doesn't even know what priests are like, or something. They grabbed a guy who doesn't even pay attention to what priests do. They had to show him from scratch. Oh, this is bad. This is probably comically bad. This would be funny to me. If I were making even a serious movie, I might want to do this as a comic relief scene with the imposter priest. So anyway, to the perpetrators, this shocking sacrilege was the occasion for ribald mirth, but the other priests, watching from distance this mockery of their law, burst into tears, cut to the heart by this travesty of the sacred rite. Oh, that's it? They just burst into tears? That's all they could do, eh? They could just cry about it? So, Steph says, wait, they said didn't deserve it, and the modern day saying didn't earn it. Intentional polarization, yes. Such impudence was more than the people could stand. One and all determined to bring tyranny to an end. Natural leaders like Gorion, son of Joseph, and Gamaliel's son Simeon, by passionate appeals to public meetings and by a door-to-door canvass, urged them to act now, punish the destroyers of freedom, and purge the sanctuary of these blood-guilty men. The most respected of the chief priests, another Jeshua, like I said, they're a dime a dozen, guys. Jeshua's dime a dozen back then, son of Gamaliel, and Ananias, son of Ananias, held meetings at which they took the people severely to task for their indifference and incited them against the zealots. For zealots, they called themselves as if they were devoted to good works, not zealous for all that was vile beyond belief. I'm going to hold it right there, even though it's the middle of the passage, because, you know, this is right in the 5-page area, and I want to have enough to read for the next break, after the next break, because like I said at the beginning, we're only doing 10 pages. This chapter's only 10 pages long today, so this will be the last break of the show. So, for our next song, I picked The Sojourner by In Mourning. This song slaps. That's it. Yep, Sojourner in mourning. All right. So we are back. We are on page 236. Got 5 pages to go. Thank you everyone for being here. The populace flocked to a mass meeting where everyone denounced the invasion of the sanctuary, the rapine, and bloodshed, but no one was prepared to resist, as it was obvious the zealots would be very difficult to tackle. So Ananus stood up in the middle and, turning again and again to the temple with his eyes full of tears, began thus. How wonderful it would have been if I had died before seeing the house of God full of countless abominations and its unapproachable sacred precincts, crowded with those whose hands are red with blood. Yet I, who wear the vestments of a chief priest and answer to the most honored and august of names, am alive and in love with life, and cannot face a death that would be the glory of my old age. And so I'll go alone, and as if no one else existed, I'll give my one life for God. What is the use of living among the people blind to calamity and no longer capable of tackling the troubles on their hands? You are plundered without a protest, beaten without a murmur, witness of murder without one audible groan. What unbearable tyranny! But why blame the tyrants? Don't they owe their existence to you and your lack of spirit? Wasn't it you who shut your eyes when the gang was first formed, a mere handful then? Encouraged its growth by your silence, and by standing idly by while they were arming, turned those arms against yourselves. The right thing was to nip their attack in the bud. See, nip their attack in the bud. Did Josephus put it that way? No, I don't think he put it that way. Right? I don't think he put it that way at all. Anyway, when they were pouring abuse on your own flesh and blood, but you, by your utter indifference, encouraged these ruffians to plunder. When houses were ransacked, nobody cared. So they seized their owners too, and dragged them through the middle of the city without anyone raising a finger to defend them. Right? This is, think of 2020. Think of 2020 when lawlessness was the rule of the day, and mostly peaceful protesters. Right? This is mostly peaceful protester shit. Next, they flung into jail the men you had let down. I will not say how many or of what character. Uncharged, uncondemned, they were imprisoned without a soul coming to the rescue. The natural consequence was that these same men were seen murdered. We saw this too. They were like a herd of dumb animals from which choice victims were in turn dragged away. Yet not a murmur was uttered, not a hand raised. Take it calmly then. Take it calmly when you watch your sanctuary trampled underfoot. You yourselves built every one of the steps by which these sacrilegious wretches have climbed so insolently. Do not grumble if they have reached the top. Why, by now, they would undoubtedly have reached still dizzier heights if there had been anything greater than the sanctuary to destroy. They have seized the strongest place in the city. From now on, the temple must be spoken of as a citadel or fort. Tyranny is strongly entrenched, and the enemy can be seen over your heads. But what do you mean to do? How can you quieten your fears? Will you really wait for the Romans to recover our holy places? Have things gone so far in the city? Are we so sunk in misery that we are an object of pity even to our foes? Why don't you rise, you spiritless creatures, and turn to meet the blows? And as you see beasts do kick out at your tormentors, why don't you remember your own personal miseries? Set before your eyes what you have suffered, what your appetite for their blood. Whet your appetite for their blood. Have you really lost the most honorable and deep-rooted of our instincts, the longing for freedom? Are we in love with slavery and devoted to our masters, as if our father had taught us to be doormats? Why again and again they fought to the bitter end for independence, defying the might of both Egypt and Persia, rather than take orders from anyone. But why talk about our fathers, our present struggle with Rome? Never mind whether it is profitable and advantageous or the opposite. What is its object? Isn't it freedom? Then shall we refuse to yield to the masters of the world and put up with tyrants of our own race? Yet submission to a foreign power might be put down to one crushing blow of fortune, but subservience to the scum of our own nation would prove us willful degenerates. So basically what he's saying is he'd rather be, he wants to be free, and he knows that the Romans can come in and solve this problem, and he would rather the Romans come in and solve this problem because it looks better for the people, because it's a more honorable loss because they are a significant force. Here you've just got these brigands, these marauders, and nobody wants to risk anything to stop them, right? And so this is akin to what was I guess I don't hear about this plan anymore. I think because in general, national security is a priority again, and national security in an authentic sense of the word, where internally we're taking things and taking care of business, like as far as keeping the peace, making the public space a safe and prosperous environment. Right, and that's why we see the ICE raids. That's why we see the shift in police officer engagement, attitudes, numbers, resources, etc., etc. And we also see a lot of new policy. Just things like a cop is not going to fucking destroy you, because the law doesn't want to destroy you anymore if you're in possession of weed, for instance. Right? That is no longer the biggest effing domestic criminal injustice issue, and we're seeing less and less criminal injustice as time goes by, right? Which then boils things down to real philosophical, political theory and such, right? Such as the application of true anarchy, and not this totalitarian socialism, that is being promulgated by the people that like to sport the anarchist logo, right? Because hey, I got into my little car accident. I don't like the fact that, you have to have a cop come to a car accident because you're at fault and you already got to pay out the ass just for damages, and for the insurance you already have, that you also have to pay, the fee for the traffic infraction for being at fault, right? Which, that feeds the state, but it doesn't feed the victim of the car accident. And part of the various reasons why it always feels like the state can take too much. And I don't complain too badly, just because, look, I was at fault, and somebody of responsibility needed to be there, right? But that's about it, as far as what I think ought to go down as such. But it is what it is. It is what it is. They have seized the strongest place in the city. From now on, the temple must be spoken of as a citadel or fort. Tyranny is strongly entrenched, and the enemy can be seen over your heads. But what do you mean to do? How can you quieten your fears? Will you really wait for the Romans to recover our holy places? Have things gone so far in the city? Are we so sunk in misery that we were the object of pity even to our foes? I'm sorry, I'm reading over that. Why am I doing that? Okay, Egypt, Persia, willful degenerates. Oh, okay, I scrolled the page up, that's why. My bad. That's the bottom of the page. Having once mentioned the Romans, I will make no secret of what occurred to me as I spoke and turned my thoughts in their direction. Even if we fall into their hands, I do not suggest we shall. We cannot suffer any worse treatment than these men have subjected us to. Could anything be more galling than first to see offerings left in the temple by our enemies, then spoils seized by men of our own race who have robbed and massacred the nobility of our capital city, murdering men whom even the Romans would have spared in the hope of triumph? The Romans never went beyond the bounds set for unbelievers, never trampled on one of our sacred customs, but reverently gazed from a distance at the walls of the sanctuary, and men born in this country, brought up in our customs and called Jews, stroll where they like in the inner sanctuary, their hands still reeking with the slaughter of their countrymen. In face of that, can anyone dread a foreign war and enemies by comparison far kinder to us than our own people? Why, if we are to call things by their right names, we might well find that the Romans are the champions of our law, and its enemies are inside the city. But that these plotters against our liberty are the scum of the earth, that for what they have done, no one could devise the punishment they deserve. I am sure you were all satisfied when you left home, and before I uttered a word, you were furious with them because of the things they have made you suffer. Possibly most of you are terrified by their numbers and their temerity, and also by the advantage of their position. But these are the results of your inaction, and now will grow worse still if you procrastinate. Indeed, their numbers are increasing daily, since birds of a feather flock together. Did he say it that way? Once again, their temerity is inflamed by complete lack of opposition, and they will naturally make use of their commanding position and fortify it too, if we give them the chance. But rest assured that if we go over to the offensive, they will be defeated by their own guilty conscience, and the advantage of height will be cancelled out by anxiety. Perhaps the deity they have offended will turn their missiles against themselves, and ungodly wretches will die by their own weapons. We have only to show ourselves, and they are finished. Even if there is some danger involved, it will be a splendid thing to die before the sacred gateways and to sacrifice our lives, if not for our wives and children, yet for God and his temple. I will champion your cause with head and hand. I will do everything I can think of to secure your safety, and every ounce of my bodily strength is at your disposal. With this eloquent appeal, Ananus roused the populace against the Zealots, though well aware that they would be most difficult to suppress, now numerous, young and intrepid as they were, and with such terrible crimes on their consciences. For they would hold out to the last, having no hope of pardon for what they have done. Nevertheless, he was ready to endure anything rather than look on when affairs were in such a parlous state. The people, for their part, clamored for him to lead them against the enemies he had denounced. Every man most anxious to be in the forefront of the fight, but while Ananus was enlisting suitable men and organizing them for battle, the Zealots got wind of what was afoot, as they were kept informed of all that the people were doing. They were furious and charged out the temple en masse in large gangs, sparing no one they encountered. The citizen forces were quickly mustered by Nonanus, superior in number, but in equipment and training far inferior to the Zealots. However, enthusiasm made up for the deficiencies on both sides. Those from the city fortified themselves with rage more powerful than weapons, those from the temple with animal courage for which no numbers were a match. The former were convinced that it was impossible to stay in the city unless they rid her of the terrorists. The zealots that unless they triumphed, they would be spared no punishment. So they joined battle with their passion in command. They started by pelting each other with stones in the streets and in front of the temple, and by hurling spears at long range. When either side retired, the victors used their swords. The slaughter on both sides was frightful, and the wounded could not be counted. Casualties on the people's side were carried into the houses by their relatives. If a zealot was hit, he went up into the temple, leaving bloodstains on the sacred floor. It might indeed be said that their blood alone polluted the sanctuary. In these encounters, the sudden sorties of the bandits were always successful, but the citizen forces, blazing with fury and constantly growing in numbers, heaped abuse on all who wanted to surrender, while those who turned tail were unable to retire because of the men pushing forward from the rear. Thus, they turned their whole strength against their opponents. They, unable to withstand this onslaught any longer, slowly retired into the temple. Ananus and his men charging in with them, alarmed by the loss of the first court, they took refuge in the inner and at once in the inner sanctum, I would assume, and at once locked the gates. Ananus could not bring himself to attack the sacred gateways, especially as the enemy were hurling missiles from above, and he deemed it unlawful, even if the attack succeeded, to bring the city crowd unpurified. So he detailed 6,000 armed men to guard the colonnades. These were relieved by others, and every man had to take his turn as sentry, but many members of the upper classes were allowed by their superiors to hire men of humbler means to take their place on guard. The whole of this citizen army was later destroyed thanks to John, who, as the reader knows, had ratted from Gischala. So, there's the chapter. That's the show. Next time, atrocities in the city, Vespasian's intervention. So now we get to the point where Rome has to show up and solve the problem. So anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow night I have a phone call, a job phone call that I have to take. So I probably won't do a show tomorrow because I need to keep. I think I'm doing something in the afternoon too, so I need to keep. I think I basically just can't do tomorrow. All right, but we'll see what's good on Friday. All right. Thank you guys so much. You have an awesome rest of the night, and I will catch you guys later.